Chapter 3 Confronting Mr. Singer, A Lesson in Persistence. The next morning, Cameron arose with a feeling of fresh levity, and decided on an outfit that was slightly more ostentatious than his typical drab plaid pants and corduroy overcoat. He wanted to stand out a tad more than usual, and he even applied a colorful brooch on his coat and a moderately more striking tie that he had only worn at formal occasions. It may occur to the reader that up until now, we haven't divulged much by way of Cameron's personal history aside from what he cultivated in Blainsville. That is to say, we don't know much about Cameron's childhood, family, or friends. He did indeed have a number of friends outside work, though the nature of his friendships with them had been rather difficult to categorize. He had varying classes of friends, starting with those he had gone to school with, and who perhaps had the strongest bonds due to Cameron's long-standing loyalty and reliability, though the more ignorant and less perceptive would have written him off as boring. There still remained, however, those who he attended school with who did not have more than a superficial acquaintance with him. When it came to those who did not know him, it was either by chance or from having chosen not to get to know him for the aforementioned reason. Cameron's school had a tendency to harbor cliques, as many schools do. However, these were especially disparate, and each one was wildly unlike from the other. Once a student had arrived in class, they would be organized randomly by the teachers, and the other students would choose very deliberately who they deigned to socialize with. Cameron had drawn the unlikely straw of being one of the few upright and conscientious pupils who did not exhibit partiality for any one group, instead focusing on his work and wishing to be known for nothing more than the merit received for his diligence. Ironically, this refusal to partake in behavior Cameron had seen as nonsensical and meaningless made him a part of his own clique, which inconsiderately labeled the Squares. Nonetheless, he wasn't one to challenge social customs, and even when questionable, once they became familiar, he would cease his resistance to them. Some students have used the less thoughtful epithet robotic to describe Cameron due to him being somewhat of a martinet in his overall stringency. Though this might be a facile assessment, one can concede for a moment that when seeing young Cameron with a proper textbook in hand, pencil readily sharpened, head propped up attentively awaiting the directions of his peers, perhaps he was a tad mundane. Yet our job here is not to judge Cameron with such harsh categories or appellations. We must go further, using our talents for observation and consolation to discover how he became the man he was. Again, this is not to say that anything was wrong with him. Cameron, like everyone else, as a child, had dreams. He had enjoyed baseball, both taking part in Little League and maintaining an active interest in it until his mid-teens. Abruptly, he had then lost curiosity about it altogether, favoring instead less competitive, more cerebral hobbies. He drew exceedingly well, though those who knew him thought he was much fitter for the role of a draftsman or architect than an artist, as he saw objects almost precisely as they were, ascertained in their ratios, and applied them with a particular talent for drawing straight lines or circles without the aid of a compass or ruler. Those who knew Cameron, even his closest friends, would jokingly call him a walking analog computer due to his temperament, phlegmatic, calm, not prone to spontaneity. However, Cameron, in his younger years, certainly manifested certain traits when others least expected them. For instance, roughly in his teens, during a low-key party involving a few close friends which entailed only light alcoholic intake, Cameron had suddenly started drinking to his body's limit, chugging down more alcohol without considering the side effects. Sure enough, this sudden intake of spirits had been too much for him to take, and he had spent the rest of the night regurgitating it up. According to those who knew him best, Cameron just couldn't take some things midway and would often overcompensate with sudden eagerness or overexert himself, especially when it came to work. The second class of friends were those he met in college or during his internship and consecutive career trajectory. These folks were arguably not as strong as the friends he had met in his childhood. Though the propensity for cliques hadn't been as prevalent as it was at school, Cameron still encountered an air of frivolity that followed him wherever he went. Choosing instead to commute rather than live on campus to cut costs, he was met with a wall of indifference and distance from those who worshipped at the altar of varsities, fraternities, and sororities. This behavior could be attributed to the fact that Cameron was from out of state, and he didn't owe allegiance to any groups, sports, clubs, instead choosing to focus on his studies. This may very well sound similar to his youth, but the truth was that Cameron's personality had remained rather stagnant. So often, those who knew Cameron expected a kind of sudden, drastic change in him, that he would choose to run off without any reason other than to do something different. they anticipated seeing him rebel, misbehave, or become bitter or hostile to the meticulous, well-behaved world of Cameron's youth. It was principally his parents who expected such things from him, though they felt none of their business to force it out of him. Understandably enough, they had been the ones who had fostered this kind of attitude, and they thought nothing negative of their parenting. They inculcated him with selfless attentiveness, punctuality, agreeableness, and many other traits that made Cameron who he was. However, he was arguably lacking in some respects. The soft-natured, reserved character of his father engendered much warmth in Cameron, and he owed him his inclination for doing things the right way rather than with impatient expedience. Yet his father had also deferred much to avoidance and even disassociation, not even in an abject or clinical sense. It was only that he much preferred not to be directly involved intimately in stressful manners. He was simply a man who sought peace of mind by whatever means possible, and if he was maltreated by someone, he would not try to challenge them for fear of endangering his equanimity. Cameron's father was a draftsman with a particular talent for designing skyscrapers, and though it seemed outwardly as if the clambering of hammers and machinery at his construction site would jeopardize his calm nature, he did indeed work successfully as an on-site consultant for many projects. However, his usual workplace was the office, where he created most of the blueprints on their computers. This aptitude for visual forms, mocked up, and that is, making a copy of a building with prudent care, and the knack for seeing how things could turn out, obviously carried through to Cameron. Though he wasn't one to ambitiously climb the ladder to his career, Cameron's father was quite obdurate in his vocation and often took his work home with him. He was originally from overseas, but blended into whatever environment he found himself with ease. It always struck people as odd that he didn't discuss his past with anybody, not even his close confidants, which meant his life story was a kind of an intangible mystery to all. This tendency had also translated to Cameron. All Cameron's father would reveal was that he had grown up in a foreign country experiencing turmoil and was forced to flee. His own father had opted to stay in his homeland, having very strong patriotic devotions to his country, and viewing leaving as synonymous with betraying his own country. Cameron's father believed this to be blind nationalism in the wake of a tyrannical government, and thought that the country would only face more upheaval, war, and economic disaster than ever. Thus Cameron's father left for good, never seeing his father again. This is all Cameron knew about his father, as he would speak no more on the matter, instead slipping into a pensive silence or changing the subject entirely. One would think that something dark was being kept at bay. Yet it wasn't because of any suspicious behavior that he kept these secrets. There was a sense of melancholy, sure, but he was more brooding and cautious than grim. Because Cameron quite appreciated his father's placidity, he never dared disrupt the smooth relationship they had by bringing up the past. Cameron's mother, on the other hand, was visibly more assertive, but lacked the agreeableness and unique depth of her husband. People would comment that it appeared at first glance that she was the breadwinner of the family because of her more assertive temperament. She was very traditional, preferring to abide in the certainties of older generations. She was a quite hands-on, no-nonsense woman who did not take lightly to fools, unlike her husband, who would patiently hold his tongue even if the situation was to his detriment. She would proclaim precisely what was on her mind, even what was bothering her, showing little concern for others' opinions. She was deeply religious, attending not only Sunday service, but also Mass, communion, and every ritual she could feasibly make, often bringing along her husband and Cameron as soon as he was old enough. She wasn't incurious by any means. On the contrary, she was openly intrigued by books and learning, particularly church history and theology, and immersed herself deeply in those subjects. She also enjoyed spending time among nature when her schedule afforded it. Whereas her husband chose to attend church out of sheer habit, she was profoundly moved by the sermons, and her own habits were rather hortatory as a result. Cameron felt this clash between his father's tranquility and his mother's fiery zeal to be a double-edged sword. What his parents had in common was their adoration of reliability and commitment to social rules, which they both carried out with little to no question. It was a rare sight indeed for Cameron to see his parents at a loss of what to do. Every task, every job, every obligation was carried out with a straight face and not an ounce of bitterness. However, Cameron's father was more affable and receptive to Cameron's needs, whereas his mother was civil and obedient, yet had her moments of caustic abrasiveness. However, Cameron had many fond recollections of his parents, vivid memories of their warmth and immense affection they had for him, even pampering him to a degree. His father put on splendid theatrical acts for the young child, breaking the reputation he had for being stoical and reticent to the extent that Cameron never suspected him to have those qualities. His mother would read aloud to him with firm resolve, her maternal intuitions assuaging her characteristic asperity. They often encouraged his freedom and independence and did not put a strain on his childhood. Both academic and extracurricular activities were acceptable, and Cameron was often able to visit his friends for baseball practice and play war games. Some might even object that they were too lax in their supervision. At a young age, Cameron was capable of walking to school on his own, as it was only a few blocks away from the Detelm home. But he received strange glances from other students who would likewise spread spurious rumors about him. These arose partly because Cameron wasn't seen with his parents very often. They included the claim that Cameron lived in an orphanage, had no real parents, and was something of an enfant terrible who required special treatment or discipline. Others asserted that Cameron was a foreign student, despite his obvious naturalized state, and that he was living in an abusive home, which was far from true. It was astounding, especially to Cameron's parents, that children so young with hardly any knowledge of the real world came to such dire conclusions about their son's life. "Well, they either know Cameron better than we do," Cameron's mother said with some humor, "or they're completely wrong about it." However, these pleasant childhood memories would not last. There came a rather unhappy, low-spirited period in which Cameron's father lost his job. It came as a great loss for the Detelm family, especially since he was so accustomed to this occupation, and to be stripped of the one routine that defined the better part of his life hit him with immeasurable intensity. Like many people with careers, he was at a loss to what to do without it. Cameron was 11 at the time, and likewise at a loss, but in a different way. Because the adult world, as it appeared to children, often funnel through reduction and truncation, Cameron saw this with a touch of unresolved dread. To him, it appeared like his father not only lost his job, but also a significant portion of himself, as if this single facet of his life had engulfed him entirely. It was no longer a part of himself, a temporal phase in his life, but the very essence of life itself. It was as if the young Cameron thought his father had been swept away by a cyclone of damning life circumstances, never to be recovered. Despite his parents' affirmations that this wasn't the case, and his father would be just fine, Cameron often retreated into his room, sometimes in tears, other times in solemn silence, to digest what he had discovered. "I'm too old to be upset and cry like a baby," he would repeat, hoping that the stoic-hearted approach to this event would solve his frustration. He recalled at the time that he was only 5 or 6 when his mother was upset with his father, hoping that they wouldn't get a divorce, or even gloomier, kill each other in a fit of ill-disposed cruelty. This may well sound ridiculous, but this is just how kids think sometimes. Their attitude can range from illogically endless optimism to the polar opposite, icy, despondent fatalism. Things did not become noticeably strained with his parents, despite their guarantees to him that he was simply going through a rough patch. Cameron's mother would become frustrated with expending the lion's share of her effort, while his father didn't seem to know what to do. She mistook this for idleness, but it was merely because he had been so used to arriving at the same place every day for the previous 8 years. After a while, he turned to computer repair, though without much luck, and trying his hand at creative drawing. Though he cycled through every company within a 50-mile radius, dusted off job portfolios, compiled resumes, and even circulated his own headshot around town like a struggling Hollywood actor, he didn't have much luck. As one can imagine, depression and lack of motivation crept up on him, which affected the impetus he had to keep trying. "It's like we're rowing a boat down a river," Cameron's father once said, "but we've run into some obstacles, like rocks or waterfalls. We'll turn out just fine. Trust me." As it turned out, they were right. Cameron's father did indeed land a position at a gas-powered plant as the head of designing and engineering, and worked there for another 13 years. Things appeared to gradually return to an equilibrium. Though he had been out of work for almost a year, Cameron's father did gain some legitimate skills in computer repair and freelance drafting, and was able to apply those to his new position. They had respect for his ingenuity and unique perspective. As Cameron was getting old enough to be nearly independent, his mother was able to devote more time to personal development and fortifying her own knack for sewing and crocheting. With these skills, she exemplified her ability to weave reverence for tradition with her own subjective interpretation and patience, making great Merle-like collages. In her older years, she softened, and her overall attitude became more tender. Cameron maintained quite a strong relationship with his parents, although things certainly changed following his move to Blanesville in the hopes of finding a job that would fit his college credentials. When his eyes landed on Blanesville, his parents, with understandably concerned expressions, inquired in earnest, "Are you sure you want to move there of all places?" He assured them that he would be just fine, and that he was sure that most of what was said of the city was exaggerated. How things had changed in these past 14 years. Though Cameron mostly preferred not to acknowledge just how jaded this place had made him feel, with the routine sway of his bland job and the avalanche of doubt incurred by the town's noxious atmosphere. He had always just nodded, saying, "All's well that goes well," and marching onward with a dignified air, despite his inward life suffering under the weight of his unwillingness to reveal what was truly bothering him. So now we have the background of Cameron's family in mind, we can return to our narrative. He arrived at work that day over an hour early, as per usual, and he was surprised to see that no one, not even the janitors or Robin, who had recently cultivated a noticeable habit of showing up to work early, wasn't there either. After peering around the length of the office, checking it in the adjacent rooms and even the break room, he concluded that they must not have arrived yet, and that he still had ample time on his hands. He decided to sort out some of the paperwork that had been occupying his desk for the past couple of days, some of which warranted attention. Obviously, there wasn't any pressing reason for this, but he had been feeling sprightly that morning and decided upon going the extra mile and cleaning it up. The paperwork wasn't urgent. If it had been, Mr. Singer, or one of his snoops, would have been making sure that it would be done on time. Instead, the specific stacks of papers were the responsibility of Aaron Finley, the new contact drafting legal specialist. Cameron, as the official senior copy center professional, dealt mainly with matters pertaining to legal proceedings, courtroom transcripts, personal trajectory, status reports, and payroll-related paperwork. Nevertheless, Cameron decided to occupy the next 45 minutes or so, safely entrenched in some of the type of work so as to be securely under the radar, away from Mr. Singer's unpredictable wrath. Finally, the hour hand struck 8 o'clock, and one by one, all his co-workers funneled into the office, which was dimly lit by a dozen or so spaced-out, harsh tungsten lights threatening to die out, become loose and fall, or both at any moment. Amid the turbid throng of workers, Robin wedged himself in and gave Cameron a look of vague concern, mixed with disappointment, and approached him askance. "You have no clue how pissed off Mr. Singer is going to be with you. Didn't you get the memo?" Cameron adopted a look of incredulity in the form of furrowed, squinted eyebrows and eyes. "No, I didn't know. No one ever told me. You didn't get that message in bold ink that was sent through the tubes yesterday afternoon that said, 'Emergency all hands meeting 7 a.m. tomorrow'?" Cameron thought about that questionable system of pneumatic tubes that tested the patience of everyone tasked with the thankless job of figuring it out. He also remembered it being emptied around shift change with the mailroom attendant who compiled every capsule into a cart and hauled it down to the truck bay before he had ever even had sufficient time to check it. The tubing system, for some unfounded, odd reason, was only available for both outgoing and ingoing messages from the hours of 9 a.m., approximately the time the mailroom employees booted the system up, to 11:30, so said mailroom attendants could take lunch, then again from 1 to 3 p.m. The shift change actually didn't start until 4 p.m., but again, the mailroom required an extra hour to clean up. Though it might seem ample time for Cameron to have checked his incoming box, he had in fact been occupied by a continuous stream of work from 8 a.m., when he started, taken lunch at 12 to 12:30, and then had his strange dream in the afternoon before leaving in a hurry. "I didn't even have time to sort through my box to get the message. They took it away to empty it out." No matter how much Cameron tried to sound reasonable and fair, Robin had an expression of flat-out skepticism, as if he were hearing the petulant account of a vacuous, deceitful teenager attempting to convince their peers that the dog ate their homework. Well, either way, Mr. Singer isn't going to have any of it. It was a really important emergency meeting. Everyone was there. Well, almost everyone. Look, I know it's just a little mistake, and nobody who is half decent should make such a big thing about it, and since you've had my back so many times before in the past, I certainly don't hold any grudges, but Mr. Singer's a different breed. You could tell him 2 + 2 = 4, and he still wouldn't believe you. He's just stubborn like that. Robin folded his arms somewhat affectedly, even more obvious gesticulation of disbelief. "Can you show me the message?" Cameron asked, trying not to bother Robin too much, despite the fact that they were on agreeable terms. Robin, not without a sense of begrudging impatience, turned around, funneled his hands into the cart behind him, and sifted out the right capsule. He found it after some struggle and twisted the cap off it. He held the neatly folded paper in front of his eyes, but not before he reached for his reading glasses in his left breast pocket. "It's getting harder and harder to see these days," Robin muttered. This confused Cameron, as Robin had never had any problems with his eyesight, not even recently. Once he donned the glasses, he read aloud in a stentorian-like voice. "Attention! All Blainesville Law Office employees. An emergency meeting will be held tomorrow, or Wednesday morning at precisely 7 a.m. All employed here, temporarily or otherwise, regardless of rank or status, must attend. Wait, I don't understand. He didn't tell us where to meet up. Even if I did get this message, it's really no use, since I don't know where to go, Cameron said, with agitation as he scratched his head and pulled lightly at his hair. Well, it's pretty obvious where he wants us to meet up. The same place we always congregate, Robin said, presupposing that Cameron always knew precisely where he was talking about. Where's that? I'm still confused, Cameron said, leaning in closer to Robin, in case he might miss a word. You know, it's right outside the Sherman Gustav building, across the street on the second floor, parallel to the reception desk, and a waiting room only 5 doors past the second cubicle. It's where we always have all-hands meetings. I've never been there in my life. I've never even heard of Sherman Gustav building. Are you serious? Robin's impatient tone shifted to astonishment. I'm being completely frank. I'm drawing a massive blank on this. When you try to describe it in logical terms, it just falls apart in my head. I don't know. Cameron's speech slurred a little. He had trouble articulating his thoughts and was quite fatigued, as he had not been getting as much rest as ordinary, even though he had taken that generous nap yesterday. Regardless, it felt as if he required not only sleep, but copious alone time and recuperation. Cameron, are you all right? You don't sound as if you're fully capable of working right now. It seems like you're a bit... Have you been drinking? No, not at all. I just really don't know what you're talking about, honestly. Cameron knew he was getting defensive, but it wasn't entirely sure what he was being defensive about. And in any case, it only seemed to be exacerbating the issue. Listen, I'm your friend. I get that it's tough working in this type of fast-paced environment. I understand any frustration or boredom you may be harboring, but please, leave your personal problems at the door when you leave home. It's not professional to bring up the weight of the world on your shoulders here. It's upsetting to everyone. Well, to those of us who want to keep this company going. We have to make sacrifices. We have to be in the game and alert at all times. Cameron, you're slacking. I can help you, but I can only help you so much. I'm here for you, but you gotta get your act together. Robin spoke this impromptu or perhaps even rehearsed monologue with such odd wording, tone, and inflection. It was as if he were a motivational guru trying to sound profound or rousing. However, it fell flat in a maudlin, almost cloying way, as if he were trying to manipulate Cameron, who was confounded by everything. Sorry, Robin, but you don't normally talk that way. I'm more concerned about you. I mean, a week ago you were ranting about Mr. Singer, supervision, and how they all make way too much money and exploit us. I mean, you called him a capitalist pig running a puppet show, but now you're talking about him as if he's one of your buddies. What's going on? I understand where you're coming from. I get that you're trying to project your lapse of mental well-being on me, but it's not going to work. I am completely normal, sane, and fit to continue working. You, on the other hand, sound like that you only just got back from the bar an hour ago. You're inebriated. I can smell the liquor on your breath. You're not in a proper position to be telling me how off my rockers I am. I don't even know how you came to that conclusion. That's nonsense, Cameron said. I was just expressing my confusion about there being a meeting at a place that I wasn't told about, and you're acting as if I'm losing my mind or I'm drunk. Are you messing with me? Is this just like an elaborate joke? Robin got up from the seat, turned around, pointed his index finger in the direction of the employee certificate tack board. You see this? Said Robin, as he nodded his head toward the board, which was mostly vacant of anything of discernible value, yet he stared at it with evident admiration. It only had 2 employees on it, who had won a certificate of notable excellence, and they hadn't even showed up in months. One of them, Warren Thompson, had retired several years earlier, and not by choice. After a moment of staring, apparently in a state of reverie, Robin continued. In a few weeks' time, if that's not too ambitious, I want my name etched into that board. I intend to change. Even though this place has its faults, and certainly isn't a dream job, I want Mr. Singer to look upon my work and tell me I'm doing a good job. What can I say? I'm a people pleaser. I know it seems like I'm crazy, because the slight change of attitude that I've had about this place, but I realized something, especially in the last few days. Mr. Singer was talking to me as we were traveling back and forth to the warehouse. He was explaining how more than ever we need workers with boldness. No, that wasn't the word. It was tenacity. He said, Nobody matches that description compared to back in the day when they'd get in trucks in and out of here every day without stopping, and we'd have people practically dashing around the same office with fearlessness and purpose. Now you look around and you see apathy and laziness. People are, as he puts it, numbed, and they have no purpose. So we have this kind of epidemic, Cameron, and he said this with such passion and sincerity, it was hard not to be drawn in. I know I've judged him before, and I'll admit I was so stupid in the past to have done so. But he's an incredibly smart, versatile, and more importantly, he just knows what's best. He said there's two types of people in the world. Those who will take the easy way out of convenience and comfort, and those who will do what it takes to achieve status and greatness in their career. If you aren't in the latter group, you might as well step aside and let those who aren't lazy and passive wear you down with their negativity. Then we got to talking about job scopes. Now, I shouldn't be saying this, but I want you to understand how generous of a man he is. He offered me a bump in my pay, and I didn't even ask him. I just did my job and paid heed to exactly what he wanted. It's not that he wants a mind reader or clairvoyant. He just wants people to listen to him and carry out his instructions. Is that really too hard to ask? From working one-on-one with him, I can tell he's got respect for the middle-class guy. He has solidarity and understanding for their plight. So, after a productive conversation where he told me about his family life, would you believe the man played in jazz band in college and even had his own studio? But now he's found his true calling in law business. Music cures the soul. Law cures the injustice in society. It's one of my favorite maxims. The man is an endless mystery of profound talent in many areas of life. Anyway, after the exchange, he offered me a higher paying position and out of state. How could I resist? To think I was planning on quitting solely a few weeks ago. How I've turned around. Cameron nodded, but only out of politeness, not with any kind of genuine approval. Wow, I didn't know Mr. Singer had so many different faces. He always struck me as a man of mystery. Cameron couldn't help saying this with an obvious tone of irony, though he did manage to avoid sounding derisive. Robin even seemed to mimic Mr. Singer's voice, with such disquieting accuracy that you would have thought his poltergeist was speaking right through him. But right before he could answer, the portentous belt of an unmistakable, deafening voice echoed throughout the office. "Cameron!" Mr. Singer promptly bustled into the room, clutching a wad of papers in one hand and undulating his other hand in an inimical fist waving in motion. "Where in God's name were you this morning?" His index finger rooted in the direction of Cameron's face in an accusatory, furious manner, much like an indignant conductor. "I swear I didn't know about it, Mr. Singer. I forgot to check the incoming messages, so I can take the blame for that. But, to be honest, I didn't expect anything," Cameron responded cautiously, as he took a full step away from Mr. Singer, like he was a great ball of fire. "Expect?" Mr. Singer roared. "Your job isn't to expect anything. Your job is to do exactly as you're told, day in and day out without objection. If you can't anticipate the future, then why don't you take over my job? I'm sure you could do a better job of doing 10 tasks at once. Let's see you taking that amount of responsibility." Cameron clasped his wrists together behind him and hunched his back, arching downward with his eyes glued to the ground as if it would make him more visually acceptable, but it did not appear to be helping. "I'm sorry, sir, but I honestly didn't know. I'll admit that I should have checked my mailbox once more after lunch, but it just slipped my mind. I swear it will never happen again." Cameron spoke fawningly, trying not to find it within him to employ the use of logic or reason, as there is no such thing as a calm, fair dialogue with a man of his temperament. He tried to finish the explanation, but Mr. Singer doggedly cut him off. "Oh, so you didn't know? Well, that's entirely your fault. I can confidently swear on my grave that I sent for messages to go out to everyone and see to it that everyone received them. I never fail on that account. I always finish what I set out to do. You, on the other hand, don't even look like you can finish sorting out a stack of papers that's covered on your desk for days. Now all I can ask of you is to check messages, and you can't even bother to do that. Well, it looks like you have all the answers. I'll leave running the facilities, warehouses, and all the administrative matters to you then. It looks like you've got everything figured out. I'm the one who's ignorant. I'll let you decide. It slipped your mind? Well, how horrible it must have been for you. I'll make sure we give you a break. Get your act together." Mr. Stringer was virtually twirling around the room in a kind of entrancing dance in which he would jab his fingers forcefully at unrelated paperwork and objects that were vaguely pertinent to his fiery, outraged speeches. Cameron was also quite confused as to what unfinished stack of papers he was referring to, as his desk was in actuality quite immaculate, and he had just concluded an extended run of organized, comprehensive sweeping of the office to find that none of those papers remained, save for what little mess his co-workers had in the meantime. Mr. Singer had pointed at a different desk, one that occupied 2 employees that did have some paperwork laying dormant on it. Cameron wanted to defend himself, but it was arduous to make clear such a case to a man. He was so adamantly stubborn that any word Cameron uttered would be treated like foul stench that was meant to be extinguished via antagonizing measures. Mr. Singer, if you'll excuse my disagreeing, I just want to make it clear that I'm not acting out of spite or sly refusal because I have nothing but the highest respect for it. But honestly, I really didn't see the memorandum. It must have gone past me. Again, Cameron was rudely interrupted by the gradually swelling, impassioned voice of Mr. Singer, who looked like a man in the midst of an enervating seizure that was both draining the life out of him and fueling his passions simultaneously. "Don't talk to me about respect, you worthless, good-for-nothing, repulsive, pitiful vermin. You don't have the faintest idea of what respect even means. If you even had a shred of it somewhere in that spineless, brainless baboon body, you would have known about that meeting months beforehand. You'd have shown up to work on time. You would have done your job correctly for once, without someone else having to clean up after your mess all the time. And you've been here for how long? 8, 9 years? Almost a decade of civility and hard work down the drain, and nothing to show for it. What does your wife have to think about it? Before you know it, you're 60 years old, with nowhere to report to but a low end of janitor work. You clearly don't have the lick of aptitude or gumption." Cameron began to wonder if perhaps Mr. Singer had at some point confused him with somebody else. There was, in fact, another man who worked in the very same office, with a similar appearance, height, and build as Cameron, who was married, and whose name was Devin Carlman. It wasn't out of the question that Mr. Singer could be in the wrong. Yet, in this particular space-time reality, in which Mr. Singer inscribed the rules in blood with hot needles of suspicion and ruthless certainty, it was absolutely out of the question that Cameron bring it up, as it would only exacerbate the already dismal situation. "And another thing," Mr. Singer paused fleetingly to regain his composure and preen up his suit, which had become crumpled from his intense movements. "Don't ever question what I say. When I am done declaring something, it is gospel. It is truth, and there is no other version of it that exists in the universe. There is no room for doubt or second-guessing. If I said it, that means it's final. In a business like this, in a world like this, we need more than ever one-track minds who have a high threshold for a day's, scratch that, a life's hard work, so they feel the bones in their body become sore. But you know what? After all the suffering, it's worth it. Where are the men in the world?" He looked around the partially vacant office as if for approval, but no one dared to answer, save for Robin, who was visibly nodding along to whatever Mr. Singer said. "Nowhere to be found, and that is the tragedy. I'll give it another chance, Cameron. If you get your act together and raise the bar for yourself, I'm a reasonable, generous man. I forgive and easily forget with the help of some beer, but I won't forget our little talk, and I hope to God you won't either. Because it's the last time I'm going to say it. We need men in this office. The world out there is harsh. Sooner or later down the road, you'll thank me for this. I know it might not seem like it now, but just you wait and see." Cameron wasn't sure if he should answer. Anything he said could be used against him, so he settled for his non-committal nods and an occasional "I understand." And with that, Mr. Singer straightened his tie and barreled out the room. There were a tangible sense of reprieve whenever he vacated the area, like a feeling of strenuous, stressful load on someone's back being lifted for the first time in hours. It felt like everybody had a breathing space and could finally act naturally for the next allotted period of time before he did his routine checkups before noon and in the afternoon. Cameron, however, did not feel the same sense of relief. Instead, he now felt, more than ever, that weight of culpability and disquietude crushing him, and there was no escape. Robin, the only one in the building who had seemed to share his frustrations, grievances, and sensibility, had now, too, succumbed to the seduction and seemed set on following the loyal, almost feudal route of a company man. Nevertheless, Cameron still had one escape, and it included the company and occasional nuisances of a certain Mr. Tiberius in the morass of the tenebrous sewer far away from the constrictions of those dowdy office walls.